If anyone asks, smile, take my hand, and don't tell them you're my brother's little brother. Ethan Carter said it so calmly that it almost sounded rehearsed, but the tightness in his voice betrayed something deeper. I stared at him across the passenger seat, wondering how the man I'd admired for years had somehow become the last person I should ever pretend to love. 3 days earlier, my biggest concern had been surviving another awkward family dinner after a painful breakup. Now I was sitting in Ethan's black SUV heading toward a luxury lakeside resort nearly 200 miles from home, carrying an overnight bag and a secret that could unravel the entire weekend before it even began. Ethan wasn't just my older brother Liam's best friend. He had practically grown up in our house, taught me how to ride a bike, showed up at every high school baseball game, and somehow always remembered my birthday, even after he moved away to build a successful architecture firm in Chicago. He had always been close enough to feel familiar, yet impossibly out of reach. Maybe that was why I didn't question him when he called late Tuesday night asking if we could meet. Maybe a part of me had been waiting years for a reason to spend time alone with him, even if that reason made absolutely no sense. My college roommate is getting married, he had explained while stirring untouched coffee. Everyone there thinks I've been dating someone for almost a year. I blinked. But you haven't. No. Then why would they think that? A faint smile crossed his face before disappearing. Because I let them. I laughed, expecting him to admit it was a joke, but he never did. Instead, he looked directly into my eyes with an expression I couldn't quite read. I need someone to come with me. You have plenty of friends. Not for this. Why me? He hesitated just long enough for my heartbeat to become distracting. Because you're the only person I trust. Those words had followed me ever since. They echoed through every mile of highway stretching beneath the tires and every quiet moment between us. We talked about music, roadside diners, traffic, anything except the obvious question neither of us seemed willing to ask. Why had he chosen me? As the resort finally appeared beyond rows of towering pines, sunlight reflected across the lake like scattered glass. Elegant white tints overlooked the shoreline while guests wandered the gardens in pastel suits and summer dresses. It looked less like a wedding venue and more like the kind of place where perfect memories were manufactured. My stomach tightened. Ethan parked the SUV but didn't reach for the door. Instead, he looked at me again, more serious than before. One more thing. What? My ex will be here. I frowned. I thought this was about your friends believing you had a boyfriend. It is. Then why does your ex matter? His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Because she's the reason I lied in the first place. Before I could ask another question, a cheerful voice called from outside. Ethan, you made it. He stepped out, walked around the front of the SUV, opened my door, and without asking, gently slipped his hand into mine. Cameras flashed somewhere near the entrance. Smiling guests turned toward us. His grip remained steady, warm, and surprisingly natural. Then he leaned close enough for only me to hear. From this moment on, he whispered, every single person here believes you're the man I love. Please don't let them discover the truth. The moment Ethan's fingers intertwined with mine, every conversation around us seemed to pause for a heartbeat before exploding into cheerful greetings. A tall man in a navy suit hurried down the stone pathway with a wide grin and wrapped Ethan in a one-armed hug before looking at me with unmistakable curiosity. So this is Noah, he said. I was starting to think you made him up. Ethan smiled with a confidence that looked effortless. I told you he was real. The man laughed. You definitely left out how handsome he is. My face warmed instantly, and I forced the kind of polite smile that I hoped looked natural. Ethan's thumb brushed lightly across the back of my hand, a tiny gesture that somehow grounded me while making my heart beat even faster. Come on, the man said. Everyone has been waiting to meet the mysterious boyfriend. Before I could react, we were walking through the beautifully decorated gardens together. White roses lined the pathways, string lights stretched between ancient oak trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers across the lakeside lawn. Everything felt like a scene from a romantic movie, except none of it was supposed to be real. Guests greeted Ethan with warm smiles, and every introduction followed the same pattern. They welcomed me as though I had already been part of Ethan's life for years. They spoke about stories they had heard, vacations they assumed we had taken together, and inside jokes that apparently existed only because Ethan had invented them. I answered carefully, always looking toward Ethan before responding, terrified that one wrong detail would expose us. Instead, he seamlessly filled every gap, weaving our imaginary relationship together so naturally that even I started questioning which memories were true and which had never happened. During the welcome luncheon, our assigned seats were side by side. Every time someone looked our way, Ethan casually leaned closer or rested his arm across the back of my chair, never crossing a line that made me uncomfortable but always maintaining the illusion. It was subtle enough to appear genuine rather than theatrical. Across the table, several guests exchanged knowing smiles. One woman whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "They are adorable together." Laughter followed, and I nearly choked on my iced tea. Ethan quietly handed me a napkin before I even reached for one. "Slow down," he murmured with a gentle smile that seemed almost impossible to fake. For just a second, I forgot we were pretending. Later that afternoon, while everyone gathered near the lake for rehearsal photos, I noticed a blonde woman standing alone beneath a willow tree. She was elegant, confident, and dressed in a pale blue dress that matched the water behind her. The instant her eyes met Ethan's, something changed. His relaxed expression stiffened ever so slightly. She walked toward us with measured confidence before stopping only a few feet away. "So," she said with a pleasant smile that somehow felt colder than the breeze coming off the lake. "This must be the boyfriend I have heard so much about." Ethan nodded once. "Claire, this is Noah." She extended her hand toward me. "It is nice to finally meet the person who convinced Ethan to stop hiding his heart." I smiled politely, unsure what that sentence was supposed to mean. Claire held my gaze for another second before quietly adding, "Take good care of him. He has spent a very long time waiting for someone." My confusion deepened, but before I could ask what she meant, another guest called her away. I turned toward Ethan, expecting an explanation. Instead, he looked out across the lake in complete silence, as though Claire had just reminded him of something he wished had stayed buried. For the first time since this impossible weekend began, I realized the biggest lie might not be that we were pretending to be together. It might be the reason Ethan had chosen me in the first place. That evening, the wedding guests gathered on a spacious terrace overlooking the lake as the setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and orange. Soft music drifted through the warm summer air, while servers carried trays of sparkling cider and appetizers between small groups of laughing friends. From the outside, everything looked effortless, but every step I took beside Ethan felt like another scene in a play that somehow kept becoming more believable. He never gave me instructions anymore. He did not have to. Whenever someone approached us, his hand naturally found the small of my back, gently guiding me through the crowd. If I hesitated before answering a question, he effortlessly continued the conversation without making it obvious that he was protecting our secret. Every tiny gesture looked completely genuine, and that was exactly what frightened me. During dinner, the bride asked everyone to share a favorite memory about the couple. Laughter echoed across the room as stories filled with college adventures and embarrassing moments were met with applause. Then someone stood and smiled toward our table. "Ethan, why do not you tell everyone how you and Noah met?" My pulse immediately quickened. We had never discussed that part of the story. I looked toward Ethan, expecting at least a brief pause. Instead, he smiled as though he had lived the memory himself. "It is actually a little embarrassing," he said. "I have known Noah's family for years, but it took me a long time to realize he had become someone very different from the kid who used to follow his brother everywhere. One afternoon, we accidentally spent 3 hours talking at a neighborhood barbecue while everyone else watched the game. After that, conversations just became easier." Several guests smiled warmly. One woman rested her chin on her hand. "That is incredibly sweet." I forced myself to smile, although my thoughts were racing. None of that had happened the way he described it. There had been countless family gatherings over the years, but never a single unforgettable conversation like the one he had just painted for everyone. Yet somehow, the way he spoke made me almost wish it had been true. As dinner ended, couples slowly made their way toward the dance floor while a local band began playing classic love songs. I quietly stepped outside onto a stone balcony overlooking the lake, desperate for a moment to breathe without pretending. A few minutes later, the glass door opened behind me. "You disappeared," Ethan said softly. I needed some air. He stood beside me, keeping a respectful distance while watching the gentle ripples across the water. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, I glanced toward him. You are really good at this. At what? Making people believe we belong together. He looked down with a faint smile that carried more sadness than pride. Sometimes the easiest lie to sell is the one that almost became true. Before I could ask what he meant, voices called our names from inside. One of the bridesmaids waved enthusiastically. Come on. The photographer wants pictures of all the couples by the dock. Ethan offered his hand without saying a word. I accepted it before I even realized I had made the decision. As we walked toward the lake, the photographer arranged everyone into pairs beneath strings of glowing lights. Closer, he called. You two look like you have been together forever. Ethan slipped one arm gently around my shoulders. I could hear his heartbeat because we were standing so close. Then, just as the camera flashed, someone behind the photographer quietly whispered, Poor Claire. She never stood a chance once Ethan fell in love with him. The words were soft, almost impossible to hear, but they landed with enough force to make my entire world shift. Until that moment, I had believed we were protecting a harmless lie. Suddenly, I was no longer certain that Ethan had been pretending at all. The photographer thanked everyone before moving the newly married couple closer to the water, but I barely heard another word. That quiet sentence continued echoing inside my mind. Ethan fell in love with him. It sounded impossible, yet every moment since we arrived suddenly felt different. I replayed the drive to the resort, the way he had opened every door without thinking, how he always seemed to notice when I looked uncomfortable before anyone else did, and how naturally he reached for my hand whenever the room became crowded. None of those gestures had felt rehearsed. They had simply felt familiar. As the evening reception continued, I found myself watching Ethan instead of avoiding his gaze. He laughed easily with old friends, congratulated the bride's parents, and thanked every member of the hotel staff who crossed his path. He treated everyone with the same quiet respect I had always remembered from growing up. Then another memory surfaced, one I had not thought about in years. I was 16 when my bicycle chain snapped nearly 5 miles from home on one of the hottest afternoons of the summer. My phone battery had died, and I had started walking along the shoulder of the road with the broken bicycle beside me. Nearly 30 minutes later, Ethan's truck had pulled over. He had been driving back from a construction site outside town. Without asking unnecessary questions, he loaded my bicycle into the truck bed, handed me a cold bottle of water from a cooler behind the seat, and drove me home. I remembered apologizing for interrupting his day. He had simply smiled and said, You never have to apologize for calling someone who cares about you. At the time, I had assumed he meant that the way an older family friend would. Now I was no longer certain. Another forgotten memory followed almost immediately. During my freshman year of college, I had been overwhelmed by finals and convinced I was going to fail one of my classes. A package had arrived at my apartment containing homemade cookies from my mother, a new notebook, and a handwritten card that read, One difficult week does not define your future. Keep going. There had been no signature. My mother later admitted she had baked the cookies, but she insisted the notebook and card had not come from her. I never discovered who sent them. Standing beneath the glowing lights beside the lake, I suddenly wondered if I already knew the answer. There you are. Ethan's calm voice pulled me back to the present. He approached with 2 glasses of sparkling cider and handed one to me. You disappeared again. I accepted the drink, studying his face more carefully than ever before. Can I ask you something? Of course. Have you always been this thoughtful with everyone? His expression softened, but he did not answer immediately. I try to be kind whenever I can. That is not what I asked. For the first time all weekend, he looked genuinely caught off guard. Before he could respond, Liam's familiar voice called across the terrace. My brother had arrived later than expected after a delayed flight, and he crossed the lawn with the same easy confidence I had known my entire life. He hugged me first, then clapped Ethan on the shoulder with a grin. I cannot believe the two of you actually kept this relationship a secret from me for so long, Liam joked. I forced a nervous laugh while Ethan remained surprisingly quiet. Then Liam looked back and forth between us with an amused smile and casually added, Although, looking back now, maybe I should have seen it years ago. Ethan lowered his eyes without saying a single word, and in that silent moment I realized something even more unsettling than before. My brother did not sound surprised. He sounded like someone who had been keeping a secret just as long as Ethan had. Sleep never really came that night. Every time I closed my eyes, Liam's words replayed in my mind with uncomfortable clarity. Maybe I should have seen it years ago. If my own brother had noticed something, what exactly had he seen? Had Ethan truly been hiding feelings all this time? Or was I simply connecting random memories into a story that never existed? The next morning arrived with bright sunshine spilling across the lake, and the wedding guests gathered on the lawn for brunch before the afternoon ceremony. The atmosphere was light and cheerful, yet I felt strangely distracted. Ethan seemed to notice immediately. Without saying a word, he placed a cup of fresh coffee beside me exactly the way I liked it, with a little cream and no sugar. I looked up in surprise. "You remembered." He shrugged as though it were nothing. Some things are easy to remember. Before I could ask how many other small details he had quietly memorized over the years, another guest approached our table. He introduced himself as Daniel, one of the groom's co-workers. Friendly and outgoing, he immediately included me in the conversation, asking about my job, my hobbies, and whether I had ever visited Seattle before. For the first time all weekend, I found myself laughing without thinking about the role I was supposed to play. Daniel had an easy sense of humor that made everyone around him comfortable. "You should come hiking with a group of us after the ceremony tomorrow," he suggested. "There is an incredible trail about 20 minutes from here. The view at the top is worth every step." "That actually sounds fun," I admitted. Before I could say anything else, Ethan calmly stepped beside me. "I think Noah and I already have plans tomorrow morning." His voice remained perfectly polite, but there was something unusually firm beneath the words. Daniel smiled. "No problem. Maybe another time." As he walked away, I turned toward Ethan. "We have plans." "Now we do. You could have just said you wanted to leave early." He looked at the lake instead of answering me. I did not want him to misunderstand. Misunderstand what? Ethan hesitated long enough for me to realize he was carefully choosing every word. "That you are here. With me." His answer should have sounded logical. After all, pretending to be together was the entire reason we had come. Yet something about the way he said it felt less like protecting our secret and more like protecting something personal. Later that afternoon, while guests took their seats for the ceremony, Claire quietly joined me near the back of the garden. "You seem thoughtful," she said with a gentle smile that felt much warmer than our first meeting. I laughed softly. "Is it that obvious?" Only to someone who has known Ethan for a long time. I looked toward the flower-covered aisle where Ethan was helping one of the elderly guests find her seat. "Can I ask you something?" Claire nodded. "Yesterday you said he had been waiting a long time for someone. What did you mean?" She watched Ethan for several silent seconds before answering. "When Ethan and I dated, I always knew there was a part of his heart that belonged somewhere else. He never treated me badly. He simply loved someone he believed he could never have." My heartbeat quickened. "Did you know who it was?" Claire smiled with quiet understanding. "I figured it out eventually." The surprising part was realizing that he would rather stay alone forever than risk making that person uncomfortable. Before I could ask another question, the music began, signaling the start of the ceremony. As every guest stood, Ethan turned toward the audience. Our eyes met across the rows of white chairs, and for the first time since this weekend began, I no longer saw a man performing the role of a devoted boyfriend. I saw someone carrying years of carefully hidden hope, and I suddenly wondered whether the person he had been protecting all along had been me. The ceremony unfolded beneath a cloudless summer sky, and every promise the bride and groom exchanged seemed to settle quietly over the guests like a reminder that the most meaningful relationships were built on honesty. I should have been focused on them, but my attention kept drifting toward Ethan. Every few minutes our eyes met across the rows of white chairs, and every single time, he looked away first. That simple detail unsettled me more than anything. Claire had said, Ethan Carter had never seemed afraid of difficult conversations, yet he avoided my gaze as though one careless second might reveal everything he had spent years trying to hide. When the ceremony ended, applause echoed across the lawn before everyone moved toward the reception hall for cocktails. Liam caught up with me near the garden fountain and handed me a glass of lemonade. "You look like you have 1,000 questions," he said with a knowing grin. "Maybe I do." He laughed. "I figured this day would eventually come." I stared at him. "You really were not surprised when Ethan brought me here?" Liam shook his head. "Not even a little." "How?" He leaned against the stone railing and sighed. "Because I have known Ethan almost half my life." "That does not answer my question." "No, but this will." He looked toward the reception hall to make sure Ethan was out of earshot before continuing. About 4 years ago, I asked him why he never stayed in a serious relationship. There were plenty of wonderful people who liked him, but every relationship ended the same way. I waited quietly. Liam smiled to himself. He told me he had already met the person he wanted. He just could not tell that person how he felt because it would complicate too many lives. My heart began pounding. Did he say who? Liam looked directly into my eyes. He did not have to. I stood frozen, unable to form another sentence. Every forgotten memory from the past several years suddenly returned with astonishing clarity. Ethan never missed my birthday. He somehow attended every family gathering, even when Liam occasionally could not make it. He always asked my parents how I was doing before asking about anyone else. Whenever I mentioned changing jobs or moving apartments, he somehow called within days to check whether everything had worked out. I had accepted all of it as kindness because believing anything else had never crossed my mind. Liam gently rested a hand on my shoulder. He respected you too much to put any pressure on you. That is why he stayed quiet. Then why ask me to come here? Liam smiled. You should ask him that yourself. Before I could respond, someone called Liam away to help organize family photographs. I remained beside the fountain, staring across the gardens until I noticed Ethan standing alone on a wooden dock extending into the lake. The afternoon breeze gently moved the water around the posts while he watched the distant shoreline in complete silence. I slowly walked toward him, each step feeling heavier than the last. He heard me approaching but did not turn around immediately. Beautiful view, he said softly. Yes, I answered, but I think you have been avoiding me. A quiet smile appeared on his face without reaching his eyes. Maybe. I stopped beside him. Liam told me something. He finally looked at me, and for the first time all weekend, I saw genuine uncertainty behind his calm expression. What did he tell you? I took a slow breath, searching his face for the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. He told me you have been protecting a secret for years. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment before opening them again. His shoulders relaxed as though he had grown tired of carrying an invisible weight. Then, with a quiet honesty that changed everything between us, he whispered, he should not have told you before I had the courage to do it myself. For several long seconds neither of us spoke. The gentle sound of water brushing against the wooden dock filled the silence that had suddenly become too heavy for either of us to escape. Ethan rested both hands on the railing and looked across the lake instead of at me. I never wanted you to find out like this, he said quietly. Then how were you planning to tell me? I asked. He let out a soft breath that almost sounded like a laugh. I was not. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. You invited me here because you were never going to tell me the truth? He nodded once. I invited you because I wanted one weekend where I could stop pretending my feelings did not exist. Just one weekend where I could know what it felt like to walk beside you without wondering what everyone else would think. His honesty caught me completely off guard. There was no dramatic confession, no attempt to convince me to feel the same way. He simply sounded exhausted after carrying the same secret for years. Why me? I whispered. Out of all the people in the world, why did it have to be me? Ethan smiled sadly. That is the one question I cannot answer. Feelings do not always arrive with an explanation. He finally turned toward me, his expression calm but undeniably vulnerable. You grew up into someone thoughtful, kind, and stronger than you realize. Somewhere along the way I stopped seeing Liam's little brother and started seeing you. The moment I recognized that, I also realized how complicated it could become. So I kept my distance whenever I could. I dated other people. I convinced myself it would pass. It never did. Every memory I had revisited over the past 2 days suddenly fit together like pieces of a puzzle that had always belonged to the same picture. The birthday calls, the unexpected encouragement, the quiet support, the careful respect. None of it had been random. Before I could respond, Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and carefully removed a folded piece of paper. The edges were worn from being opened and closed countless times. I wrote this almost a year ago, he admitted. It was supposed to be a letter saying goodbye to these feelings. I carried it because I thought bringing it here would finally help me let go. He looked down at the unopened letter before slowly placing it back into his pocket. But after spending these 2 days with you, I realized I was lying to myself again. My heartbeat refused to slow. Why did you tell everyone we had been together for almost a year? His eyes met mine with complete honesty. Because imagining a life with you was easier than imagining one without you. The words settled between us with a quiet weight that neither of us could ignore. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. I cared about Ethan deeply. That much had become impossible to deny. Whether those feelings had quietly become something more, I still did not know. A burst of applause drifted from the reception hall as guests celebrated the newly married couple beginning their first dance. Ethan stepped back, creating a respectful distance between us once again. "You do not have to say anything," he said gently. "When this weekend ends, our agreement ends too. We will drive home, tell everyone it simply did not work out, and I promise I will never put you in this position again." He offered me a small, bittersweet smile before turning toward the reception hall alone. I watched him walk away, realizing that the man who had waited years for a chance to stand beside me was now preparing to lose me without asking for anything in return, and somehow that hurt far more than I expected it would. The music from the reception hall echoed across the lake as I remained alone on the dock, staring at the gentle ripples where the evening light shimmered across the water. Ethan had given me exactly what I thought I wanted for years without ever realizing it. Freedom. No pressure. No expectations. He had confessed the truth only because circumstances forced his hand, and even then he had immediately offered me an easy way out. If this weekend ended as planned, I could walk away with my life completely unchanged. The only person who would carry the heartbreak home would be him. Somehow that realization made it impossible to breathe comfortably. I closed my eyes and began replaying every memory that had surfaced throughout the weekend. The broken bicycle, the anonymous note during college finals, every birthday call, every family gathering, every quiet moment when Ethan had chosen to stand nearby without demanding my attention. None of those memories had asked for anything in return. They had simply existed because he cared. I had spent years believing love had to arrive dramatically, with perfect timing and undeniable certainty. Instead, I discovered it had been quietly waiting in familiar places all along. A gentle voice interrupted my thoughts. "You finally figured it out, did you not?" I turned to find Claire standing a few steps behind me. She smiled kindly before joining me at the edge of the dock. "I think I did," I admitted. She looked toward the reception hall, where laughter drifted through the open windows. "Do you know why I never resented him?" I shook my head. "Because he never lied to me about his character. He tried very hard to love me the way I deserved, but his heart had already chosen another direction. That is not something anyone can force." She paused before adding, "Do not make your decision because you feel sorry for him. Make it because you cannot imagine your future without him." Her words lingered long after she quietly walked away. I stood there for another minute before something inside me finally settled. The answer I had been searching for was not hidden in the past. It was hidden inside one simple question. If Ethan left tonight and never reached for my hand again, would I regret letting him go? The answer arrived instantly, and it frightened me because it was so clear. I hurried back toward the reception hall just as the evening celebration reached its liveliest moment. Couples filled the dance floor while guests laughed beneath strings of glowing lights. I searched every corner of the room until I finally spotted Ethan standing alone near the terrace doors, politely declining another dance invitation. Before I had time to second-guess myself, I walked directly toward him. He looked surprised when I stopped in front of him. "Noah," he asked quietly. I smiled, though my heart was racing faster than it ever had. "You said our agreement ends when this weekend is over." He nodded. "Yes." "Then I would like to change the agreement." Confusion crossed his face. "What do you mean?" I took a slow breath before gently reaching for his hand, this time without an audience expecting me to perform and without any reason to pretend. His fingers instinctively closed around mine, but I knew he was waiting for me to let go if I had made a mistake. I did not. Instead, I looked directly into his eyes and said the one sentence I had never imagined I would say. "I do not want to spend another day pretending that the only reason I am holding your hand is because someone else expects me to." For the first time since I had known Ethan Carter, the confident man who always seemed to have the right words stood completely speechless, and the smile slowly appearing on his face looked nothing like relief from a successful performance. It looked like someone who had finally stopped waiting for permission to hope. 1 year later, I found myself standing outside another lakeside chapel, adjusting the sleeve of my light gray suit, while a familiar breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers across the gardens. The setting looked strangely similar to the place where everything had changed. Yet this time there were no hidden stories, no carefully rehearsed smiles, and no fear that someone might discover the truth. Ethan stepped beside me holding 2 cups of coffee exactly the way we both liked them. He handed mine over with an easy smile that had become part of my everyday life. "Still no sugar," he said. I laughed. Some things should never change. He gently bumped my shoulder with his before looking toward the guests gathering near the entrance. "Ready?" I nodded without hesitation. More than ever. Over the past year, we had learned that building a real relationship looked nothing like pretending to have one. There had been long conversations during quiet evenings, road trips with no destination except spending time together, Sunday dinners with my parents, and countless ordinary mornings that somehow became my favorite memories. Nothing had been rushed. We had given each other room to grow beyond the fantasy we accidentally created that wedding weekend. The strongest part of what we shared was never the grand confession or the dramatic surprise. It was the trust that slowly replaced uncertainty after the pretending ended. Liam walked over with the same amused grin he had worn since the day everything finally became honest. "I have been waiting years to stop keeping your secret," he joked. I shook my head with a laugh. "You could have warned me a little sooner." "No," he replied. "Some people have to discover happiness on their own." Ethan smiled at him before quietly thanking him for believing in both of us long before we believed in ourselves. A few minutes later, Claire approached with her husband beside her. She hugged me warmly before turning to Ethan. "You finally look peaceful," she said. Ethan smiled with genuine gratitude. "I finally am." She looked at both of us and added, "I always hoped the right ending would find you." As the ceremony concluded and guests gathered for photographs, the photographer waved us closer to the newly married couple. "You too," he called with a smile. "Stand a little closer together." Ethan looked at me with playful amusement. "Remember when someone had to tell us that?" I laughed before naturally slipping my hand into his. "Seems unnecessary now." The camera flashed several times while friends cheered around us. Nobody saw 2 people performing for appearances. They saw exactly who we were. During the reception, one of the guests asked how we had first gotten together. Ethan looked at me, silently inviting me to answer. I smiled as every unforgettable moment from that weekend returned with perfect clarity. "It started with a favor," I said. "Someone needed a date for a wedding." The guest laughed. "That sounds like the beginning of a movie." I looked at Ethan, whose eyes still carried the same quiet warmth that had followed me through so many years before I ever understood what it meant. "Maybe," I replied. But the best part was that the only thing pretending accomplished was giving us the courage to tell the truth. Ethan gently squeezed my hand beneath the table, and this time there was no audience to convince, no agreement waiting to expire, and no secret left to protect. The role we once borrowed for a single weekend had quietly become the life we both wanted, proving that sometimes the most meaningful love stories do not begin with perfect timing. They begin with patience, kindness, and one brave decision to stop pretending when the truth has already found its way home.